All right, welcome back to Off the Bench, presented by United Dairy Farmers. A pleasure to be joined by the multi-award-winning columnist, former columnist of the Cincinnati Enquirer, and he has started back up his morning line. Paul Daugherty. Doc, how are you, man? And welcome back. I guess you were, in North Carolina, your annual trip to hang out, do a little hiking, and hang out with your son, right?
That's right. When all the craziness occurred with the Bengals and the Steelers, we were high up in the North Carolina woods, Tom. Didn't see a thing.
Do you go around the Appalachian Trail?
No, that's a little bit west of us, closer to Tennessee than to Asheville.
You ever done that? Gone up the Appalachian Trail or any part of it? Not the whole thing, I mean, but any part of that? I've
No.
always wanted to do that.
Yeah, actually, I had thought about doing it, and then I took the job from the Enquirer, or to the Enquirer from the old Cincinnati Post, right when I was thinking about doing it, and I had to start right away at the Enquirer. But I've always thought at least doing a section or two of the trail. But I at this late date, I think it's more of a concept than a reality.
When you're hanging out with your son, and we'll get to some of the topics here in a minute, but look, any of us and many watching are parents out there. Your kids grow up. We've already sent one daughter to college. We have a son who's finishing up high school this year, and I already just get so overly emotional thinking about him not being around, neither one of them being around. But now, what's it like that your son is an adult, a productive citizen, living his life in a different city from where you and your wife are? What's that like now to go spend that time with him? I know that sounds silly. Of course, it's great time, but how is it different as the years go by?
That's a great question. I mean, he's 36, so he's been out of the nest for quite some time. So it's not necessarily that. What it is, at least from my standpoint, is time tends to compress as you age. I'm amazed, continually amazed at how quickly time passes, and it goes quicker the older I get. The 3 days went by like 3 minutes, literally. And because time compresses like that, Tom, you're very conscious of not wasting any of it, trying to make the most of every minute. Not to make this a real big deal or put too fine a point on it, but you want every minute to count. Whereas in the past, many years ago, you think, well, we're going to do this every year, and we still will do this every year as long as I'm able. But the window of my being able to do what we do is closing, and because of that, every year is more special, more precious, and more meaningful than the year before. If that makes any sense to anybody.
Dude, I mean, that makes perfect sense to anybody and everybody. And I made the comment last week. I always so much enjoyed, obviously, all your sports stuff, but the human side, of your son, your daughter, and your dogs. And I just think, those are topics we can continue to talk about on this show, because I think there's more to the world. Doesn't feel like it sometimes, but there's a hell of a lot more to the world than sports. Now, you're away from it all. You get back into town. What did people share with you, and what have you been able to gather about the whole Bengals Steelers game over the weekend?
Well, several things. One, it was a ridiculous football game. I mean, by any measure, it was a ridiculous football game. The sort that seems to happen only when the Bengals play the Steelers in Cincinnati. It's right up there with the perfect Pac-Man playoff game. Right up there with the Chemo von Oelhoffen injury to Carson Palmer. It's an all-timer. That said, I got a lot yesterday of the sky is falling, which is what we expect in Cincinnati, because we're not secure enough in our fandom, our belief in these teams, and for very good reason, by the way. We're not secure enough in their success that we can handle a loss like that. There are a lot of people jumping off bridges today who shouldn't be. That said, to me, a couple of things stood out. One is, and we talked about this last week, Tom, the rust showed. The rust cost them the football game. I don't think there's any getting around that. You can talk about questionable officiating. You can talk about Zach Taylor's decision making. You can speak to the obvious of Joe Burrow's turnovers. What cost him the game was rust. You saw it on the first play of the game. You saw it throughout the game. Guy gets sacked 7 times. He gets hit 11 times. They needed that practice time. They needed the game time in August. And I think next year you will see Zach Taylor change his mind about that. Interestingly enough, there was sort of a foreshadowing, Tom, right? On Thursday night, when the Rams got obliterated at home by the Bills, the Super Bowl champions. And Sean McVay is Zach Taylor's mentor. And Sean McVay doesn't start any of his veterans in August either. And look what happened to them. So I think next year we'll see these guys play a half or so. But I'll tell you what really stood out to me that I haven't really seen talked about much was Joe Burrow is one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the league. But he has his own distinct personality. And one of the reasons that makes him great is that he is confident enough to think he can make any throw. And obviously you want that in your quarterback. I've always said only very good and very bad quarterbacks are capable of throwing multiple interceptions in an NFL game. Obviously, nobody's saying that Joe Burrow is a very bad quarterback. Sometimes he makes throws he shouldn't make just because he's Joe Burrow. And the one yesterday was the pick six that Minkah Fitzpatrick baited him into throwing and basically set the tone for the game. So there aren't going to be very many bad games like that for Joe Burrow. That was the worst one he's ever had. We won't see another one like that this year. But we saw it yesterday, and it is a byproduct of Joe being Joe, the guy that we want. But every so often, Joe being Joe could blow up in their face, and I think that's part of what happened yesterday. All that said, Tom, to wrap it up, nobody in December is going to remember a game in September. It's a little like NCAA basketball. Teams that go to Hawaii or whatever over Thanksgiving and lose to unranked teams. It's a big deal at the time. When March rolls around, it doesn't mean anything. I think ultimately, even though you only get 17 cracks at it, so it's a big loss, but this one's not going to haunt the Bengals, I don't think, in any way, shape, or form. The only thing they should take from it is, 1, you better block better than you did yesterday and all last year, and 2, maybe mix in a half of action for your veterans in August.
I got to tell you, though, Doc, I think you're right on no one's going to remember this game or the outcome of this game. But I do think the one thing now that's going to start to build, because we saw it multiple times last year, and the overwhelming majority of those times, the players and the team bailed Zach Taylor out of some decisions, some time management things, those kinds. And I'm not the kind of guy, and I know you're not either, and you've written about this with David Bell, you've written about this with other head coaches and or managers here in town, that, look, the easiest thing in the world to do is to point the finger at those guys in that job. But look, this is big boy country, right? This is the NFL, and this is year number 4. And when I hear some of the comments, and we're going to have a few of them coming up later on, about, we got to learn from our mistakes. Look, that's all you want from anybody in life. Each and every one of us, you try to learn from your mistakes. But some of these things, Doc, have got to be, and maybe they are, directly addressed, especially something like the Chase touchdown that wasn't challenged. When you take in all of the circumstances, and I know you didn't see the entire game, but you're up to speed on what I'm talking about here, to not have somebody in Zach Taylor's ear, and I don't put this directly on him, but I put it on his staff or the franchise, somebody has got to say to him, and I don't care how many bullets are flying, so to speak, someone has to say to him, Coach, throw that red flag and challenge his thing.
Well, I think you're right. And I wasn't at the game or at the post game either, or at his news conference yesterday, so I'm really not qualified to speak about this. I would say that I never saw where Taylor said, I never had anybody in my ear. I mean, as a rule, coaches do.
Yep.
have someone telling them when to throw that flag. Whether he did or he did not, I have no idea. Maybe he just didn't want to throw somebody under the bus. Maybe, in fact, the call was all his. I would be a little surprised if it were. I hear what you're saying, and I agree with what you're saying. Little things are big things if you want to win a Super Bowl, and that's this team's goal. And it might come down in a Super Bowl to a coach making the wrong decision that'll cost them a championship. That said, I still look at big picture, and I see 5 turnovers. I see an offensive line that did not perform well for whatever reason. I see the Bengals running 90 some plays and scoring 20 points.
Yeah.
I see 4 cracks from the 1 yard line and nothing. So, sure, I think it's a concern, Tom, but all the other things to me were far bigger concerns than that. Now, we'll see. I mean, if this plays out and keeps going and he keeps, messing up, then sure. One game, I'm not going to throw him to the wolves in one game.
Fair enough.
We used to hear this a lot about Marvin Lewis's clock management was so terrible, and sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. But I never felt that clock management was the deciding factor in the Bengals losing a game under Marvin Lewis.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. I want to shift gears to UC, and again, you were out of town over the weekend. Now, look, this was a blowout win against Kennesaw State, so you take it for what it's worth. You knew it was going to happen, and it did happen. But now all of a sudden they're going to start getting into some bigger games, better opponents. Miami of Ohio is no pushover. I think UC is going to beat them at Paycor Stadium this weekend. But Miami's no pushover any longer. And then you start getting into the meat of the schedule and the meat of the conference. Ben Bryant, who started down in Fayetteville, we talked about, missed some throws that could have been touchdowns. That's okay. You move on, and they got beat. They bounced back. We did see Evan Prater. Now, we know how provincial Cincinnati is. For those who don't know, Evan Prater was Mr. Football in Ohio, the Ohio High School Player of the Year out of Wyoming High School. I saw him play a lot in high school because his school plays in the same conference as where our kids go to school. So I saw him play a lot. Basketball, football, kid's an incredible athlete. He leads them on a long touchdown drive, 4 for 5, 92 yards. He runs 44 yards for a touchdown. So we know about the athlete this guy is. What I'm getting at, I guess, Doc, in a long-winded way, a very long-winded way, just ask my wife, is, if you're Luke Fickell, you're trying to win every single game. Bryant won the starting job in a fair competition. But as we move forward, do you suspect we start to see Evan Prater more and more?
I don't know. You're walking a slippery slope with that. I don't know who said it many years ago, but it's still true. If you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have any quarterbacks. Obviously, they come at this with uniquely distinct talents. One guy is a pure pocket passer. The other guy can run. It's sort of a nice problem to have, but you got to be careful in how you manage it. I suppose I could see a time when, depending on the opponent or even in an in-game situation, where you switch, where you pull Bryant and you bring in Prater, or if you're playing against a team that is not so vulnerable to the pass but doesn't contain a quarterback very well, then you start Prater. I don't know. I think their skills, like I said, are unique for each one of them and could serve purposes very well for each guy. What you don't want to do is have one guy lose confidence or have his teammates lose the trust in him. And I think if you get into the business of using 2 quarterbacks, that's a possibility. I think a guy like Bryant, a pocket passer, kind of a rhythm guy, I don't know that you play him a half and he doesn't have a great half and you yank him, or you yank him in the middle of a quarter because he's overthrown another deep ball. There's a traditionalist in me that says, you made your pick. You made your selection at quarterback. You stick with that guy. In dire circumstances, maybe you pull him out and put the other guy in who you think is better suited to that situation. But if I've made my decision, and it was a decision made over months, not days, not hours, you got to stick with that guy. And it's not like Bryant was terrible the other day. He's pretty good.
Oh, he's
I
very
don't know
good.
what it says to be pretty good against Kennesaw State. That's one thing I really don't like about college football and why it'll never be as good as pro football to me, because you have too many UC versus Kennesaw States on the schedule.
Yeah.
But he played well. I mean, he didn't play well enough or poorly enough to say, well, we got to think about using the other guy. Although, you know what? Again, Tom, you got another team's defensive coordinator who's going to be up all night, all week trying to game plan for two coaches. I mean, that's an advantage. You just got to be careful with it.
Last thing I wanted to ask you about, and I'm throwing this off the wall at you, but while you were away, I know you are aware that Bob Huggins was finally inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame. And I don't think there's a human being alive that played for him, that watched him coach, whether it was at Cincinnati, now at West Virginia, that played against him or had to coach against him, that would argue this guy belongs in the Basketball Hall of Fame. I'm sure you would agree with that, and you covered Bob Huggins for years and years and years and years.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. Your thoughts on Bob Huggins, and finally getting in. Why did it take so long? There are guys that have gone in that I don't think are 1/3 the coach Bob Huggins is, just as a coach.
His personality naturally rubs some people the wrong way, I think. In some respects, halls of fame are a little bit, personality contests. Bob has never been one to schmooze with people that might be able to help him. He's not interested in doing any of that. He's not a politician. I am who I am, basically, running the Popeye theme here. And you don't like me, that's on you, not me. And when it comes to making halls of fame, that might not be the best way to be if you want to get elected early. Bob got elected completely on his merits. Obviously a terrific basketball coach, a father figure to any number of his players. I covered his whole career at UC and talked to the guys over the years that played for him. And to a man, with one exception who I will not name, they had nothing but respect for Bob. And I mean, he was a son of a bitch, frankly, to them in practice. But he brought the best out of them. He got the best out of those guys. He appreciated guys who gave it their all the time. The ultimate Huggins player was Kenyon Martin, who not only he came into UC as a raw player known mostly for his defense, came in not at all polished student, left as a top draft pick and a fine, fairly polished young man. That was the ultimate Bob Huggins guy, but there's a lot of guys like that. So sure, he belongs in the Hall of Fame, and now he's finally there. It might have taken him a little longer, but really good for him because he got in being himself.
Yep, no doubt about it. All right, Doc, welcome back home. Hope all the muscles and the knees and everything, the hamstrings, the back, all that stuff still in one piece. Yeah. And we'll catch up with you again next week. Thanks for the time today.
Thanks, Tom.
All right, Paul Daugherty, kind enough to join us, and he's got the morning line rev back up. So you'll certainly want to check that out. It's great to have him because he brings a perspective and has in Cincinnati sports forever that is second to none.